Welcome back to this bonus episode of the LifeWorks Living Well podcast. I'm still your host, Mark Hennick. If you're just starting here and you didn't listen to the last episode yet, I'm continuing my conversation with Dr. Bonnie Kaplan. Bonnie is a research psychologist and professor emerita at the University of Calgary. Her new book, co-authored with Dr. Julia Ruckledge, is The Better Brain: Overcome Anxiety, Combat Depression, and Reduce ADHD and Stress with Nutrition. Bonnie, thanks for sticking around.
Happy to continue this, Mark. Thank you.
So we got into such a great conversation before. I thought it would be really helpful for me, but also for our audience, if we continue that a little bit and try to unpack some of the things we discussed and get into some new areas as well. And first and foremost, I wanted to ask you about the habit loop of either healthy or unhealthy eating. You know, so much that we do is seemingly just out of automatic habit, especially our diet. It might have gotten that way through our circumstances. Maybe we're just really busy and grabbing something on the go, or super stressed out and we're eating to comfort ourselves. Or maybe it's a set of habits that was passed down from our family. That's just how we learned how to eat, right? Was in front of the TV or eating certain foods. So how do you become aware of what your food habits actually are, first of all, and then potentially change the unhelpful ones if you identify any, but being cautious though, and I'm always mindful of this, being cautious not to get into a maladaptive relationship with your food where you're hyper focused all the time on what you're eating. How do you navigate that?
Yeah. I'm going to start at the end of that question first, because it's really important that people who are trying to change their diet do so in a positive way. So, you know, as we were ending the other segment, I was talking about the ultra processed stuff. Don't worry about the ultra processed stuff. You know, start learning about the whole foods. You really have to cook, and that it comes as bad news to some people. But we actually have a chapter in our book of recipes, and we have the preceding section is on how to prepare, how to purge your pantry, and you know, keep in mind, if you don't buy it, you don't eat it. And so the things to buy so that you can start building and improving on what you're consuming. And the ultra processed stuff will just fall away. Don't be hard on yourself. Think about this as a positive experience. What can I do for my brain? What can I do to optimize my ability to focus and to feel better? I think that's key, is to being positive. That breaks the habit loops and so forth. And there are some transition things. If you look on my website, there's a little tab, tips for clinicians, but really it's for anybody. The ways that you can take some baby steps in the right direction.
Yeah. Now, how does, I mean, we know that diet and mental illness in particular are intricately entwined. And we didn't get as much into this in the other segment, but I want to unpack this a little bit now. So many of us, at least I can only speak to my own experience because I only know my own mind and my own experience. A lot of us eat for comfort. We eat for, you know, sometimes you just had a really bad day and you want to gorge on something, or certainly over the course of the pandemic, junk food, alcohol, all of these things have been impacted, and I think in a sense of trying to deal with our emotional eating. So what is then, if you can unpack for me, the tie or the linkage between what we eat and mental illness, going in that direction, but then also, to reference back to the habit loop, the direction between our mental illness and our perhaps maladaptive feeling, and our choices for what we eat?
Yeah, that's very important, the way you presented it, Mark. It really is an arrow that goes two ways, definitely. So, and we have scientific data that we review in the book that shows that. But first of all, let's change the slogan. Let's eat for resilience. And we show in our book, there is Julia Ruckledge, my co-author, and I have done a lot of the research on the proof of principle using micronutrients in pill form. Not that we want to put the world on pills. I mean, we want people to eat better first. But we have shown so clearly, and as has the world literature, that what we consume influences how we feel. It influences our brain health. And you know, this is a field where we're not reinventing the wheel, but we are rediscovering with 21st century information stuff that was known over 100 years ago. If you look at the People's Home Library, published in 1910, used all across the prairies, and it said, how to take care of your cattle, how to take care of your homesteading, etc. If you look in the index for mental illness, it said, well, the problem is that there's imperfect nutrition. Can you believe that? 1910.
Mm.
And of course, I've actually given a lecture tracing it back 3,000 years, but you don't have time for that. So let's go forward. Current time, our current evidence shows you can study a group of people in terms of their current dietary pattern and come back and look at them a couple years later, and their dietary pattern predicted their risk for a diagnosis of a mental disorder. That's been done in teenagers in Australia. It was done in grade 5 children in Nova Scotia, published in Pediatrics in 2019. And they could predict, based on what the kids were eating, who would end up with a referral for a mental health problem 2 years later. That's very powerful information. In a study from Spain, they showed over the course of 6 years, they could predict who would end up with depression. So if the public knew this, that's what bothers me. This is what drove us to write this book. The media will not cover this research, and it's all published in major psychiatric and scientific journals, all of it, 60 to 100 articles. And it's coming out. I mean, every week, more and more is coming out. So, but if the public does not know this, and our physicians are not taught about what micronutrients do in the brain, and they aren't, it's not in the educational curriculum, then how can we change the mental health care system? And that's our goal. Our goal is to prevent a lot of the mental disorders. I'm not saying this is magic. I never say we're going to get rid of mental illness, okay? But our goal is to try to decrease the mental disorders, decrease the suffering, first with nutrition and all of the other lifestyle interventions. And especially with children, Mark, to prevent young developing brains from being exposed to medication before they have to take it. Somewhere down the line, some of them will end up on medication. But why are we medicating these developing brains with, as a first step? Makes no sense. So that's, I kind of meandered over that question, but I think you can see why we need to educate the public to eat for resilience. And the
Yeah, I mean
Health
that's
Canada, so
no,
I
go
was going
ahead,
to
Health
say
Canada.
something nice about the food guidelines now are terrific for the half your plate concept. Half your plate being fruits and vegetables. That's a really enlightened step.
Yeah.
Sorry, you go
And that's
ahead.
that's a good rule of thumb, but also I think we need to recognize the fact that healthy eating doesn't seem all that accessible. Sometimes when I walk through the grocery store in my neighborhood, putting an organic tag on something just gives an excuse to jack up the price. And the reality is that people living in shelters, living on the streets, or even just working poor, are just trying to get by. And the reality is that it's cheaper to buy soda than it is to buy milk. It's usually at the front of the grocery store. It gives you that quick sugar hit, so it feels good, it tastes good, right? So then how do we actually
Yeah.
make healthy food, real food, as you said, how do we make that more accessible to people who just can't afford it otherwise?
As with everything, it's a matter of education. And by the way, soda is cheaper than milk, but water is cheaper than both of them, right?
Good
So
point.
this is what we have to teach people. But this is such an important point. I try very hard to dispel the myth that it's cheaper to eat junk food. People think that that's the case, and it is not the case. We have research that has shown that people who are taught to eat a whole foods Mediterranean style diet save 20% of their food budget. Okay. That's an Australian study. I have clinicians here in Calgary who have people track their food intake and what they're spending on food currently with their, a lot of ultra processed stuff. And then as they learn to eat and cook a healthier diet, not steak and lobster, but, healthy vegetables and dried beans and so forth, and lentils. And they save a lot of money, and they're shocked. Everybody's shocked. So we should spend a minute on why is there a myth that healthy food has to cost more? First of all, you don't have to eat organic. We don't have time to get into that, but let's not use organic as a comparison. Secondly, you don't have to eat steak and lobster every week. Most people don't, not even the wealthy probably do. I don't know. And third, if you learn to cook from from the inexpensive healthy sources, you will fill your body, make your mind work better, etc. But here's why. Do you want to know why the myth is there? This is my opinion.
Hmm.
And if you or any of your readers have a different opinion, I'd love to hear it. But I think it's because of the concept of immediate gratification.
Hmm.
If you want to eat something right away, that vending machine is only going to take a couple bucks from you, right? And you're going to
Hmm.
get something that will, as you were saying, will give you a quick rush. They know how to do it, those food producers. We live in a terrible food environment that's pushing all this junk at us. And you've put out only $2. But if you want to be cooking and you go to the grocery store, you're never going to be spending just $2. And it takes planning, which a lot of people have difficulty with. It takes planning, figuring out what you should buy to put together. And so you're always putting out more money at once to have the
Hmm.
healthy things in your pantry. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it is. And it's certainly a myth that even I've believed, and I try to eat
Mm.
as healthy as I can, but I think it's so pervasive. Partly because it's almost a cultural divide in some ways. You see on TV somebody beautiful going to yoga, drinking their kombucha and eating their salad and all that stuff, and it just seems like healthy living is only for that group of people. And I think in
Yeah.
many ways that's what separates people even more, is like you say, that myth, that lie that we've been sold.
It's all a matter of education.
Mm,
Everything comes down to education. Teaching people at a young age that we're eating for our brain, teaching them how to cook with inexpensive ingredients, teaching them that there's an infinite variety of ways to prepare and consume these healthy foods. The other day, I was looking for recipes on lentils, and I just Googled lentils. I think I used the word recipes. And I think I had some spinach in the fridge. So lentils and spinach recipes.
mm,
I had 7 million recipes in less than 1 second. You know, I mean, the information is out there, and lentils cook as fast as a pizza, a
mm,
prepared pizza, So but you have to have some herbs maybe and spices in your house. You have to think ahead to have these things on hand. And it's not the same as going to a machine like a vending machine or a convenience store and getting a bag of chips and soda, which
mm,
is cheap
mm.
and gives you an immediate rush. But,
Well, and I think, and there's
we'll
also
have to do better.
I think there's a certain risk taking. That's too strong of a word for it, but the same thing happened to me the other day. You mentioned rice and beans earlier. I was just rooting through the cupboard looking for something different to eat. And I realized I have rice, I have beans. I've never made rice and beans before, but I've heard those two things go together. So I tried it. And I think that there's a certain anxiety about doing stuff like that. That's how my grandmother always cooked. Why is this in the soup? Well, because we had that. That's why it's in the soup. And I think you have to be a little brave
Yeah.
and take risks when you're cooking.
Oh, that's funny that you experience it as a risk. I tell people an opportunity for trying
Mm,
something new is to open your cupboard, see what's there, put two or three of them together in a string and enter them on Google and find out what kind of interesting recipe you can find.
I've done. I'm a little bit ashamed to say that I've actually done that with alcohols in my cupboard before. I have the bottoms of a couple of
Oh,
different bottles. I thought, what can I make with these? So probably not the healthiest way, but I'm
oh,
glad that I found
no,
the rice and beans instead.
that's
Now,
right.
now I do want to ask you though about, and we didn't talk about this beforehand, but um, GMOs, genetically modified organisms. There's been
Yeah.
quite a few stories about how this method could be helpful. Let's start there because that might be controversial for some people. The idea of golden corn, I think it's called, or something like that, that can be more nutritionally
Golden rice. Yeah.
beneficial and can grow better in environments where people are starving. Now, that said, of course, GMO doesn't have a good reputation. It's something that is seen as
Yeah.
harmful. Where do you stand on that?
Um, this is a really, really complicated issue because there are different kinds of GMO, and there's controversy about one of the pea protein-based burgers because it uses some GMO modified something to look like blood. So does that
Mm,
make the burger GMO? I mean, there's a lot of controversy. You have to understand that ever since the time of Mendel, who raised different peas, he was genetically modifying his crop, but in a natural way to select for the ones that grew the best, that had the largest number of peas per pod, etc. So humans have been genetically modifying our crops forever. Now that they're using CRISPR and so forth and doing it under a microscope, a lot of big promises are made, and it turns out they aren't always fulfilled. So it's complicated. I just go simple. It's kind of like when people ask me about this specialized diet or that specialized diet. I'm a kind of a fundamental person. Nutrients are the foundation of our health, physical and mental.
mm,
They are fundamental for making our brains work and the rest of our bodies. They're fundamental for how cells communicate. So let's just eat real food and do it in a way that is interesting and will save us money, save on
mm.
our food budget, and will be very gratifying as you teach your kids to cook or cook with friends or whatever.
Yeah, keep
So
it
that's
simple.
step
Yeah.
one. Keep it simple.
Now,
Yeah.
there's going to be circumstances where there always are, where it's not so simple for a variety of reasons. So, and why I ask or why I bring this up is because I'm curious as to where supplements come in. You talk a lot about supplements in your book, and you've already mentioned that people probably aren't getting what they need from their
Mm.
daily diet. But can they, with a few mindful changes, actually get everything in your need that they need? Or, in your view, are there times where nutrients or supplements rather wouldn't actually hurt to add into your diet?
So supplements don't hurt. I mean, unlike the scare stories that you see the media have, they love these scare stories. Your vitamins might be killing you. There's never been a death recorded since Health Canada started keeping records in 1967. Never a death from a micronutrient. Tens of thousands of people have died as a result of medications, even taken properly. So we don't need to be afraid of supplements. But we also can't expect a, a whole lot from the over the counter ones. They tend to be very restricted ranges, very, very tiny doses, typically 20, 25% of the recommended daily allowance. We can't expect a therapeutic effect. So if you're taking a multivitamin mineral Centrum or one a day or any of those, I wouldn't say stop it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, but I've never heard even an anecdote to suggest that taking one of those improved mental health. Whereas we have
Mm,
this whole body of literature now of over 50 peer reviewed scientific studies that have shown improved mental health, and they've converged on one set of symptoms I can tell you about if you like, but improved mental health and everything from case studies to open label case series to within subject crossover to randomized controlled trials with comparators, randomized controlled trials with placebos, the whole range of scientific methodology, multiple laboratories, 3 countries, and they have all shown that there is therapeutic benefit from taking a couple of different broad spectrum, higher dose micronutrient formulas. Now, we wish there were more than two such formulas, but companies don't want us to study their formulas. And we have a
Mm,
story about that in the book. And that's another
mhm,
issue about how money gets in the way of science sometimes. But there is all this research showing that, uh, well, I'm going to say what I believe is the case, which is that Linus Pauling, two-time Nobel Prize winner, was correct when he said some people probably have inherited predisposition for a mental disorder because what they've inherited is something involving the control of the basic elements, nutrients in our brain. And so we think that, for example, I'll be very concrete. Mark, maybe you've inherited a need for more magnesium than my brain needs to function optimally. And maybe I've inherited more a need for more vitamin B6 than you need for optimal brain function. And there's no test that can tell us that yet. But the broad spectrum formulas, which are a shotgun approach, provide roughly 15 minerals and 15 vitamins that we know, the 30 roughly that are needed every day at above RDA level. And they are resulting in better than 50% benefit in groups of people with disorders. So, 50% of the people. So we know that supplements can be therapeutic, uh, but not over the counter formulas. They're
mm,
just too low, you know.
mhm. No, I mean, I think
And by the way, don't
yeah,
go
please.
taking don't go taking a half a bottle of one of those or something, thinking that's going to solve the problem, because then you're getting everything out of balance. Don't do that.
Very
Okay.
good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I was going to say I'm a kind of a conundrum for a lot of reasons, but in this context, because I take a fair number of supplements myself. I mean, I've been taking B
Mhm.
vitamins since I was a teenager. I subjectively find that it improves my energy and my metabolism, and that was
Mm.
long impacted by my negatively by my depression. So I think when I started taking those, it for me really helped. But on the same hand, like you mentioned, I'm as suspicious and even critical of this industry as I am of most industries. You know, where the primary obligation is often to the shareholder. So quality of supplements has always been a concern for me. Are you actually getting what you're paying for? And there were a number of stories that tested a number of these supplements only to find out that they're not actually giving you what they advertise for. So, how do you be a conscious consumer in this regard then? If there is something that you want to try for subjective benefit or whatever, how do you actually figure out what might be helpful, what is good, what isn't, what should you definitely avoid? Is there any kind of guidance out there in that
Mm.
netherworld of the
Yeah.
nutraceutical industry?
So you need to read chapter 11 in our book, where we review every single multi nutrient formula in the world that has shown benefit for mental health under controlled scientific conditions by mostly independent scientists, not by the companies themselves. And by the way, we two authors, Julie and I, have studied different formulas, and we have never taken a penny from any company, nor will we. That's just the way we do things. You can't say the same about our pharmaceutical research, right, for mental health. Unfortunately, it's quite the inverse. So the studies that have shown, that the truth in advertising is a problem with the nutraceutical companies, those are the over-the-counter formulas. They're not the ones that have been subjected to research, and it's a real problem. The one exception, you really hit on something I wonder if I could talk about for a minute, and that is the B vitamins.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
So when I talk about when I give lecture, by the way, there are lectures on my website, and I appreciate that you keep giving my website there, Mark. If people want to know more about what the research shows, because we can't get into that in just this kind of casual conversation very much, but I usually break the research down into three categories. One category is single nutrients. From the point of view of people wanting to improve their mental health, forget the idea that there's a magic bullet out there, because all the research, millions of dollars have been spent since the 1920s on one nutrient at a time. And once you see the diagram in chapter 2, you'll see why it's ridiculous to think that a single nutrient is going to really optimize your brain health. It's just impossible. So forget the idea that if your friends tell you, oh, take vitamin, I don't know, ABC, whatever, because it's really going to help you think better or something, you should be very skeptical. Then at the other end, you've got the broad spectrum formulas I mentioned, which have the largest amount of research and the most promising results, especially for mood regulation. And in between, though, there is this very solid body of research on B complex. And it's in mood regulation, and it's in reduction of stress, and it's also even in reducing cognitive decline in people who are beginning to show signs of dementia. And obviously, our brains need a lot of B vitamins. So, a very cheap and easy way to improve your resilience. You're not going to get rid of a mental disorder this way, but just to improve your energy, your resilience, and is to go to an over-the-counter kind of place, ask, what's a good B complex, take one every morning after breakfast. Don't freak out if your urine turns day glow yellow. That's spilling of
It does,
riboflavin.
yeah.
It does, yes. And a lot of people think there's something wrong, right? So I'm glad you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, take one of those a day, and you may feel, as you said, you may feel better energy. Some people use it instead of a cup of coffee, you know. And we published data from Alberta showing improved resilience to stress with B complex. I was surprised. It was after our flood. But it's very solid research from around the world. There are about 10 randomized controlled trials. So B complex is very, very, but beyond that, if you're looking to really improve your mood regulation, you should be looking at the broad spectrum formulas, I think.
I think that's good advice, and
Yeah.
really to rely on the science. I mean, there's so much out there. It's so easy to get confused, but to look to the experts, to look at the science, I think, and to be a critical consumer of science as well. Especially now in an age of disinformation, it's so easy to get off on in so many pathways. So, thank you for sharing so generously sharing your expertise and the science with us today. Dr. Bonnie Kaplan is a research psychologist and professor emerita at the University of Calgary. Her new book, co-authored with Dr. Julia Ruckledge, is The Better Brain. Where to put it? There it is. Overcome Anxiety, Combat Depression, and Reduce ADHD and Stress with Nutrition. Thanks again so much, Bonnie, for being here today.
Thank you for your time, Mark.
In our changing world, there is an unchanging principle for success that inspires us. By improving a person's life, we'll improve how they perform at work. We are LifeWorks. We are the world's leading total well-being provider. We are innovators with tech-enabled solutions. Our mission is to improve people's lives by supporting the whole person, their mental, financial, physical, and social well-being. These people are the heart of successful organizations, leading these organizations to a more resilient future and making a real difference in the world and in our communities. Improving lives, improving business. We are LifeWorks.